Section 15 of Warriors of Old Japan and Other Stories by Yei Theodora Ozaki. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tai Hachi Shiragiku, or White Chrysanthemum, Part 1. On the outskirts of a remote village at the foot of Mount Aso in Kyushu, a bell was slowly pealing from a Buddhist temple. It was the season of autumn, and the twilight was falling fast. Over the lonely place and the gloom of the deepening dusk of night, the solemn music, reverberating across the hills, seemed to toll the transientness of all things earthly. Not far from the temple was a small cottage. At the door stood a young girl, anxiously waiting for her father to come home. From time to time she wiped away the tears which fell from her eyes, and her face and attitude expressed great sorrow. She was but 15 years of age, and as she stood there, a young and slender figure, she looked like a cherry blossom of spring in the falling rain. She was alone, for her father had gone out to hunt some days before, and had never returned, and she had had no tidings whatever of him since. She and her father were all in all to each other. Her mother was dead, and her elder brother was only a name to her. She could not remember him. He had run away from home when she was a small child, and no one knew what had become of him since. As White Chrysanthemum, her heart full of sorrow and foreboding, watched and waited for her father's return, she started at everything, at the leaves falling from the trees, at the sighing of the wind in their branches, at the dropping of the water from the bamboo pipe which brought the hill stream to the house. As these different sounds from time to time caught her ear, expectation made her hope that they might be the footsteps of her father coming home. But the hours passed by, and still he did not return. As the mists rose, and the clouds began to close over the mountain, the loneliness of the scene was deepened by the plaint of insects chirruping in the grass, and by the slow pattering on the broad banana palm leaves of the rain just beginning to fall. At last, the dreariness and stillness of approaching night oppressed the girl so much that she could bear it no longer, and she made up her mind to go in search of her father. It was a sad sight to see her as she ran out from the bamboo gate and turned to give a last look at the little home nestling in the shelter of the pine trees. Then resolutely she turned away and set her face towards the mountain path. On her head she wore a large mushroom-shaped rain hat, and with a stick in her hand she began to climb up the rough thorny pass into the depths of the mountains. As they towered range upon range, one above the other, and were lost in the distance and blackness of night. The rain fell more and more heavily, and as the girl stumbled up the steep pass, she had often to wring her sleeves, which were now wet with rain as well as with tears. So absorbed was White Chrysanthemum in the thought of finding her father, whom she had watched climb this very road 3 mornings before, that she hardly noticed that the storm gave signs of lifting. Suddenly the rain ceased, the clouds cleared, and the moon shone brightly. The change in the weather at last roused the girl to look about her, and she saw that the path now led her downward to the valley. With a sigh of relief she quickened her pace. She had walked for about 2 hours when she saw at some distance in front of her a single yellow ray of light shining through the gloom. Had she come to a house where she might possibly hear tidings of her father? As this hope dawned upon her, she eagerly hastened towards the light. She soon reached an old Buddhist temple standing in the shadow of a group of pines and cryptomerias. From within came a voice chanting the Buddhist scriptures. Who could it be studying in so remote a place at that hour of the night? Shiragiku entered the gate, and in the moonlight which made everything visible saw that the whole place was in a dilapidated condition. The fence was falling in many places, weeds grew all over the garden and between the flagstones, as if no one ever trod the path. Even the posts which supported the gate shook in the wind. White Chrysanthemum walked up to the porch and knocked on the heavy wooden door. Not until she had knocked and called several times did she hear any stir within. Then someone answered in a subdued voice. The storm shutters were pushed aside, and a young bonze appeared. He started when his eyes fell upon the girl, and he stared at her silently as if wondering who she could be or what had brought her there at that hour. Shiragiku, seeing his scrutiny, drew near and said in a low, sweet voice, "I am looking for my father. He went out hunting some days ago and has never come back. I am indeed sorry to trouble you, but will you be so kind as to tell me if any one has come to this temple, either for rest or food, within the last 2 or 3 days?" The girl spoke so quietly and looked at him so gently that the young bonze was reassured in a moment. Her evident distress appealed to him, and when he looked at her again, he saw that she was as beautiful as a flower. Her skin was white as snow. Her jet-black hair, disordered by the storm through which she had passed, fell like the graceful branches of a willow tree over her shoulders. Her large almond eyes were sad and full of tears, and as he gazed upon her it seemed to him that she could not belong to the earth, that she must be a tennin, an angel from the Buddhist heaven. He asked her to enter the temple and said, "Tell me who you are, and whence you come, and what brings you out this stormy night. I will listen to your story if you will tell it to me." The wind had risen again, and was blowing in gusts round the temple, and whistling through the chinks and crannies of the old building, while from the garden came the mournful cries of an owl. The desolation and strangeness of the place touched the girl's sorrow to the quick, and she burst into tears. As soon as she was able to speak, she wiped her eyes and said between her sobs, "I am the daughter of a certain samurai of Kumamoto City. Our house was once rich and prosperous, and our hearts were full of joy. We lived happily, knowing nothing whatever of care or sorrow. When the war (Footnote: The War of the Restoration. End of footnote) broke out, all was changed. The grass round our house was stained with blood, and even the wind smelt of blood. Families were scattered far and wide from the homes where they were born, and the air was rent with the cries of parents seeking their lost children, and of children calling for their parents who could no longer hear them. Pity is no word to express the feeling which filled the heart at these sights. My father likewise went to the war, and my mother then escaped with me as far as Mount Aso. There she found a tiny cottage in the shadow of the temple, and with the money she had managed to bring with her, we lived as best we could. As we were afterward told, my father fought with the rebels. When we heard that, we were greatly astonished, and our sleeves were never dry with wiping away our tears. Day by day, morning, noon, and night, we waited, hoping that my father would return. Thus the summer passed. Autumn came, and the wild geese flew across the sky in flocks towards the south. But there came no news of my father. My mother pined away with grief and anxiety, till at last she died. Thus, before we knew whether my father was alive or dead, I was left alone in life. I felt as if I were dreaming in a dream. Whenever I think of that time, my heart is pierced with sorrow. My days were passed in weeping at my misfortunes and in bemoaning my unhappy fate. Had it not been for the kindness of neighbors in the village, I should not have been able to live. Last spring, my father came back and found me out. I told him of my mother's death. Since then, he has never ceased to grieve. I tried to cheer him by telling him that it was the fate of all mortals to die, but my words brought him little comfort, and in this sad way we passed our time. The other day he went out hunting, and since then has never returned. Again I was left alone, with no one to look to for help. Unable to bear the loneliness any longer, I started out this evening to look for him, and have come thus far. Our family name is Honda. My name is Shiragiku. My father's name is Akitoshi. My mother's name was Take, and my elder brother's Akihide. I can hardly remember Akihide, for when I was a small child, he ran away, fearing my father's anger because of his bad conduct. But though he left us, my mother and I never forgot him. In the morning when it rained, and in the winter evenings when the wind blew chill, we longed for him to come again to the shelter of his home. But from that day to this, we have heard nothing of him, and know not what has become of him. My mother gave me many messages for him, firmly believing that one day we should meet again, and that he would yet fulfill his duty as a son, and restore our house to its former prosperity and happiness. In this hope she died. As Shiragiku proceeded with her story, the young bonze listened with eager attention. At these words, his face changed with sudden emotion, and the tears fell from his eyes. After some moments he said to her, Poor girl, your story is a very sad one, and I feel for you in your many troubles. You can go no further tonight. Rest here in peace until the dawn." As he spoke, it seemed to Shiragiku that his voice was familiar to her, and though she could not remember having seen him before, yet for some unaccountable reason she felt that he was no stranger. His manner was so kind and gentle and sympathetic as he went and came, bringing food for her supper and quilts for her to sleep upon, that memories of her early home and childhood stirred her heart. Her thoughts went out to the runaway brother. If he would only return, he would be about the same age as the young bonze, and surely as good as he to anyone in distress. Glad was she to have found a place of rest for the night. With many humble prostrations, she thanked her host for his hospitality, and apologized for all the trouble she had given him. When he withdrew, bidding her good night, she knelt in supplication before the shrine at the end of the room, where Amida Buddha and Kannon, the goddess of mercy, reigned in peace above the lotus and the burning of incense. Only through the mercy of the gods could she hope to find her father. Only through their help with her long-lost brother ever come back to those who waited for him year after year? For many minutes she knelt on, praying earnestly, then, worn out with grief and fatigue, she rose from her knees and lay down to fall fast asleep. At the hour when the hush of the night is deepest, Shiragiku saw her father enter the room and draw near her pillow. The tears stood in his eyes, and in a sad voice he said, "Shiragiku, I have fallen over a precipice, and now I am at the bottom of a chasm many 100 feet deep. Here the brambles and bamboo grass grow so thick that I am unable to find my way out of the jungle. I may not live till the morrow, so I came to see you for the last time in this world." As soon as he had finished speaking, White Chrysanthemum stretched out her hands and tried to catch hold of his sleeves to detain him, crying, "Father, father!" But with the sound of her own voice she awoke. She sprang up, expecting to see her father, but there was nothing in the room except the night lantern glimmering faintly. While she was wondering whether the vision were a dream or a reality, the dawn began to break, and the beating of a drum throbbed through the temple. White Chrysanthemum rose soon after sunrise, ate the simple breakfast of rice and bean soup she found slipped into her room, and quickly left the temple. She did not wait to see the kind priest, though he had asked her to do so, saying that he would do what he could to help her, for she had remembered his diffidence the night before, and thought that, very likely, he belonged to a sect which forbade its priests to converse with the world, and she felt sorry that she had disturbed him. Her dream was so vividly real to her that it seemed as if she heard her father calling to her for help. So, making all possible speed, she set but once more, with the faith and simplicity of childhood, to find him. Far off, in the woods, the bark of a fox could be heard, while along the path the cloudy tufts of the obana *, an autumn grass, Miscanthus sinensis, rustled as she passed. Shiragiku shivered as the cold morning wind pierced through her body. As she pursued her way along the rough mountain pass, wild creatures scuttled away, frightened, from before her into the woods, and overhead the birds sang to each other in the trees. At last she reached the top of the pass, to find it covered with clouds, and it seemed to White Chrysanthemum as if they must carry her away with them in their onward sweep. She sat down on a stone to recover her breath, for the climb had been steep. In a few minutes the mists began to clear away. She stood up and looked about her, hoping that she might find some trace of her father, but as far as the eye could reach, nothing but mountains, range after range, could be seen riding one above the other in the blue sky. Suddenly a noise in the bushes behind her made White Chrysanthemum start, and before she could flee, a band of robbers rushed out upon her. They seized and bound her tightly. She cried out for help, but only the echoes answered her. Down the mountain they led her till they reached the valley. For a whole day they hurried her along till they came to a strange-looking house. This was in such a neglected condition that moss covered the walls, and it was so closely shut up that the sunbeams never entered the rooms. As they approached the place, a man who seemed to be the chief of the band came out, and as he caught sight of the maiden, said with an evil smile, "You've brought a good prize this time." The robbers now untied Shiragiku's hands and led her into the house, and then into a room where dinner was prepared. with rice and fish and wine in great quantities. Then they all sat down, and as they began to eat, it seemed to her that they were a lot of demons. The chief passed some food to her and pressed her to eat. The long walk in the bracing air of the autumn day had made Shiragiku so hungry that in spite of her fear and distress she was glad of the food. At last, when she had finished her meal, he turned to her and said, "That you've been caught by my men and brought here must be the work of fate. So now you must look upon me as your husband, and serve me all your life. I have a good koto," the Japanese harp, "which I keep with great care, and to show your gratitude for this marriage, you will have to play before me often, and to cheer me with your songs, for I am fond of music. If you refuse to obey me, I will make your life as hard as climbing a mountain of swords or walking through a forest of needles." Shiragiku felt that she would rather die than marry this man, but she could not refuse to play the koto for him. The koto was brought by one of the men at a word of command from the chief, and placed before the girl, who began to strike the chords, her tears falling fast the while. She played so well that even those hard-hearted robbers were touched by her music, and one or two of them whispered together that hers was a hard fate, and they wished that they could find some means of saving her. Outside the house, in the shadow of a large tree, stood a young man, watching all that went on and listening to the music. By the voice of the singer as she sang, he knew that the player was whom he sought. No sooner did the music stop than he rushed into the house and attacked the robbers with great fury. Anger gave strength to his onslaught, and the bandits were so taken by surprise that they were paralyzed with fear and offered no resistance. In a few minutes the chief was killed, while 2 others lay senseless on the mats, and the rest ran away. Then the young man, who was dressed in the black vestments of a priest, took the trembling girl by the hand and led her to a window through which the moonlight streamed. As Shiragiku gazed up in gratitude and wonder at her deliverer, she saw that he was none other than the young priest of the temple who had been so kind to her the night before. "Don't be afraid," he said quietly and soothingly. "Don't be afraid. I am no stranger. I am your brother Akihide. Now I will tell you my story, so listen to me. You cannot remember me, for you were only a little child of 3 when my bad conduct roused my father's anger, and I ran away from home and started for the capital. I embarked on a small vessel, and after sailing along for several days, I reached Wakanoura, passing the island of Awaji on the way. From Wakanoura I proceeded on foot. It was the close of spring, and the cherry blossoms were falling, and the ground was covered with the pink snow of their petals. But there was nothing of the joy of spring in my heart, which was heavy at the thought of my parents' displeasure and the fearful step I had just taken. As soon as I reached the capital, I put myself under the charge of a priest, and went through a severe course of study, for I had already repented of my idle ways and longed to do better. Under my good master's guidance, I learned the way of virtue. My heart was softened by knowledge, and when I remembered the love of my parents, I regretted my evil past, and never did the sun go down but I wept in secret over it. So the years went by. At last the pain of homesickness became so great that I determined to return home and beg my parents' forgiveness. I hoped and planned to devote myself to them in their old age, and to make amends in the future for the shortcomings of the past. But insurmountable difficulties beset me in my new-formed purpose. War had broken out, and the face of the country was entirely changed. Cities were turned into wildernesses. Weeds grew tall and thick over all the roads, and when I reached our province, it was impossible to find either the old home or any one who could give me the slightest clue as to the whereabouts of you all. Life became a burden to me. You may imagine something of what I felt, but my tongue fails to describe my misery. I was desolate, with no one belonging to me, so I resolved to forsake the world and become a priest, and after wandering about, I took up my abode in that old temple where you found me. But even the religious life could not still my remorse. I was haunted by the fear of what had become of my father and mother and sister. Were they alive, or were they dead? Should I ever see them again? These were the questions which tormented me ceaselessly. Morning and evening I prayed before the shrine in the room where you slept last night, prayed that I might have news of you all. Great is the mercy of Buddha. Imagine the mingled joy and sorrow I felt when you came yesterday and told me of all that had happened since I left home. I was about to make myself known to you, but I was too ashamed to do so. It was, however, harder for me to conceal my secret than it would have been to tell it, for I longed to do so with my whole heart and soul. In the morning, when I came to the room and found you gone, I followed after you in fear lest you should fall into the hands of the bandits who haunt these hills, and thus it was that I saved you. You can never know how glad I am to have done this for you. But alas, I am ashamed to meet my father because of the remembrance of the past. Had I done my duty as a son, had I never run away wickedly from home, how much suffering I might have saved my mother and you, poor Shiragiku. Terrible indeed is my sin. And with these words, the young man drew out a short sword and was about to take his own life. When Shiragiku saw what he was going to do, she gave a loud cry, and springing to his side, seized his hands with all her strength and stopped him from doing the dread deed. With tender sisterly words, she tried to comfort him, telling him that she knew his father had forgiven him and was living in the daily hope of his return, that the happiness and solace he could now give him in his old age would more than atone for the past. She begged him to remember his mother's dying prayer, that he would establish their house and keep up the ancestral rites before the family shrine when his parents were dead. As she spoke, he desisted from his desperate purpose. The peace of night and the stillness of the moonlit world around them brought balm to both their troubled hearts, and as they bade each other good night, the silence was unbroken save for the cry of the wild geese as they flew across the sky. End of section 15.